She didn't knock. She already knew. Grace Okafor stood on the porch of the house where she had lived for 11 years, where she had painted every wall, cooked every meal, buried her grief quietly in the corners of rooms that were supposed to be hers. Two black garbage bags sat at her feet. Her youngest, Adiz, had both arms wrapped around her mother's waist, face pressed into her side, not crying, just holding on the way children hold on when they understand something enormous has happened, but don't yet have a word for it. Grace put the key in the lock. It didn't turn. She tried it again, slowly, the way you try something when your hands already know the answer, but your mind needs one more second. The key was the same key, the lock was different. Inside, she could hear them moving, footsteps crossing the kitchen she had tiled herself, a drawer she recognized by its sound. Her mother-in-law's shadow passed the frosted glass of the front door, unhurried, without slowing. It did not stop. It did not even pause. Daniel had been in the ground for less than 24 hours. He was 41 years old. He had collapsed at his desk on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and by Thursday evening Grace had sat in a hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic and bad light, holding both her children's hands, listening to a doctor explain that some hearts simply stop. 11 years of marriage, 2 children who had his forehead and her stubbornness. A life Grace had believed, genuinely, completely believed, was something no one could just reach over and take. She had been wrong about that. The bags held what they had allowed her to keep: 2 changes of clothes for each child, school books, a photograph of Daniel from their wedding day, which she had slipped between the pages of a Bible because it was the only thing she was holding when they told her to pack. The night before, the night of the burial, while she was still in black, while her eyes were dry in the specific way eyes go dry after hours of grief that has used up everything, Daniel's older brother Emeka had pulled a chair close to hers. His voice was low and deliberate, the voice of a man who had decided something and was now simply informing. "The house is in the family name," he said. "You understand that?" Grace had looked at him. He continued, "Daniel never updated the deed. Your position here is not what you may have assumed." She said nothing. "A week," he said. "That should be enough time to arrange yourself." Across the room, her children sat together on the carpet. Tobina was 9, already tall, already carrying the careful stillness of a child who has learned that adults sometimes say things that change everything and that the right response is silence. Adiz was 6. Her head rested on her brother's shoulder, both of them watching, both of them already understanding more than they should have had to. Grace looked at her children. Then she looked back at Emeka. "Thank you for letting me know," she said. And she did not argue, not that night, not in that room, not in front of her children's eyes. Before we go any further, if this story has already found the place inside you it was looking for, hit that subscribe button now. We bring stories like this every week. The people who need them most find them because someone cared enough to share. Now let's continue. Grace used 4 of her 7 days to find somewhere to go. Not an apartment, a room, in a shared house on the far side of the city, owned by a Ghanaian woman named Auntie Sylvia, who had a laugh that arrived before she did, and a personal policy of not asking questions she had decided she didn't need the answers to. The room had 1 window, a wardrobe with a broken rail, and 2 narrow beds that Grace pushed together the first night so her children could sleep the way they always had side by side, Adiz's arm across her brother, both of them breathing slow. Grace carried both garbage bags up the stairs herself. Tobina carried Adiz's backpack without being asked. He was 9 years old. On the 5th day, Daniel's family came for the children. Grace opened the door to find Emeka in the hallway beside Mrs. Okafor, her mother-in-law. The old woman's face was arranged into the careful expression of someone who has practiced performing concern until it almost looked real. Eyebrows set just so, voice pitched just below accusation. "Those children need stability," she said. "You're in a single room. You have nothing to offer them." Grace kept her hand on the door frame. "We are their family," Emeka added. "We can provide what they need. Surely you can see that." Grace looked past them both for a moment, at the narrow landing, at the strip of grey afternoon light coming through the stairwell window. Then she looked back at their faces, two people who had just taken a woman's home the morning after her husband's funeral and were now standing in a rented hallway explaining that they were the ones who cared. "You buried my husband," Grace said, quietly, evenly. "You will not bury my children too." She closed the door. A lawyer's letter arrived 2 weeks later. She took it to a legal aid office on a Wednesday morning and sat across from a young woman who read it carefully, set it on the desk, and said without any drama at all, "They have no automatic right. You're present and providing. Without a court order, those children stay with you." Grace rode the bus home with her hands folded in her lap. She found work cleaning offices after hours. On weekends, she waitressed at a function hall that smelled of old carpet and reheated food. Auntie Sylvia watched the children during late shifts and refused every offer of payment, pressing food into Grace's hands instead, as if the transaction she was actually making was something that money would only have cheapened. The room became a world. Tobin did his homework spread across the pushed-together beds, textbooks open, pencil in hand, quiet and focused in a way that made Grace's chest ache with something between pride and sorrow. Adiz drew pictures on the backs of envelopes, houses, trees, a woman with big hands, and a calm face that always looked like her mother. Grace ironed school uniforms at midnight under a single bulb. She set her alarm for 5. She never, not once, said a single damaging word about Daniel's family within earshot of her children. Not once. One evening, Tobin looked up from his homework and asked, carefully, why they didn't live in the big house anymore. Grace set down the iron. She thought for a moment before she answered. Then, some people make decisions out of fear. Fear of losing what they think belongs to them. It doesn't make them right, it makes them small. He sat with that. Then, what do we do? We build, she said. What people take from you does not define you. What you build after does. He reached for a notebook on the bedside table and wrote it down. She would not see that notebook again for 14 years. Time moves differently when survival is the only calendar you have. The years pressed forward. Tobin grew into the quiet, precise brilliance of someone who has understood early that effort is not optional, that for people who look like him, in a world that looks like this, excellence is the only currency that can't be stolen. A scholarship at 14, another at 16, a full academic grant at 18 that took him to a university 4 hours away. Grace held his acceptance letter folded against her chest for 3 days before she let herself say it out loud. Adiz was a different composition entirely. Louder, sharper. She had her father's laugh and something behind her eyes that had always looked like it was saving itself for the right moment. She chose law the way some people choose a weapon, with full knowledge of what it was for, and exactly how she intended to use it. Grace moved out of Auntie Sylvia's house the year Adiz turned 12. A small flat, 2 bedrooms, her name alone on the lease. She stood in the empty living room the afternoon she collected the keys and allowed herself, finally, to cry. Not from sadness only, from the particular exhaustion of a woman who has held herself upright by will alone for 6 consecutive years, and for whom the first real moment of safety lands not like relief, but like collapse. Her body had been bracing for so long it didn't know how to stop. She wiped her face, unpacked the kettle first, made tea. Across the city, Daniel's family had settled comfortably into the story they had constructed about themselves. The house renovated, Mrs. Okafor holding Sunday gatherings in the East Wing. Emeka remarried. When Grace's name came up among relatives, and it did, occasionally, it was spoken in the tone reserved for people whose suffering served as a useful lesson. She struggled, they said. It was very hard for her. What they meant was, she did not fall apart the way we expected, and we have never quite known what to do with that. Tobin graduated top of his class, then a master's, then a board position at a firm that designed infrastructure across 3 countries. He was 27. He called his mother that evening, and she cooked jollof rice, and they sat at her small kitchen table with steam rising between them. his long frame folded into a chair that was too small for him, both of them completely unbothered by this. That night, without introduction, he reached into his bag and placed something on the table between them. A notebook, the cover worn soft, the spine splitting at one corner. He pushed it toward her. She opened it. Inside, in the handwriting of a 9-year-old pressing hard on the page. What people take from you does not define you, what you build after does. And beneath it, in the same careful hand. Mum said this, remember it. Grace held the notebook against her chest and was quiet for a long time. Adiz passed the bar at 25. By 28, she was taking cases that found their way into local news, property disputes, contested wills, inheritance suppressed and hidden, families denied what a spouse had clearly meant for them to have. Her colleagues noted her precision early and continued to note it. She had a specific quality in those cases, a focus that looked almost personal. She never told them why. She didn't feel the need. The call came on a Tuesday in October. Nothing announced it. Grace was at her desk at the community health center, where she had built an administrative role from part-time hours into something that felt genuinely like purpose. Her phone lit up with Adiz's name. Mum, Emeka is selling the house. Grace was still. There's a dispute in the family. I've been going through Dad's original paperwork. She paused. There was a life insurance policy. It named you. They never disclosed it. Silence on the line. How long have you known? Grace said. 3 weeks. I needed to be certain before I told you. How much? Enough, and there's something else. The original deed, Dad made a substantial deposit before the family arrangement was ever formalized. I found the transaction records. You have a legitimate claim. Grace leaned back slowly in her chair. 15 years. She had spent 15 years not looking backward, not from forgiveness exactly, but from a clear-eyed understanding that backward was a direction that could not feed her children. She had kept her face toward what was ahead. She had built something real, from the inside out, with her hands and her nights, and her absolute refusal to become what that morning on the porch could have made her. Now the past had turned around and was walking toward her with her daughter's voice. The legal process ran 8 months. Adiz handled every document with the precision of someone who had been, without knowing it, preparing for exactly this her entire adult life. Tobiner covered the costs without discussion. He transferred the money and said only, let her finish it properly, don't let her carry this part too. Emeka retained a lawyer, then a second when the first reviewed the documents and quietly asked to be removed. Mrs. Okafor called Grace directly one afternoon in the 5th month. Her voice was different. Something at its edges had worn away, something that may once have been certainty. We didn't know about the policy, she said. Grace answered, without pause, without heat, you did. Silence. You don't have to admit it today, Grace continued. The court has the documents. It will be resolved there. She ended the call the way she had lived the last 15 years, steadily, without needing the other person to acknowledge the truth in order to know it was true. The settlement came on a Thursday. Adiz called before it was fully processed. Her voice was controlled and luminous in the same breath. It's done, Mum. It was not a fortune. It was not designed to humiliate. It was fair, the specific fairness of something being returned that should never have been taken, carrying the weight of 15 years of wrongness finally accounted for. Grace did not feel triumph. She felt something quieter and more complete, like a window that had been stuck for a very long time, finally sliding shut against a cold she had learned to live with but had never stopped feeling. She donated a portion to Auntie Sylvia's church. The old woman had died 2 years earlier, but her community kitchen still ran every Saturday morning. Grace wrote the check in her name. She set aside money for grandchildren who didn't exist yet. She kept enough to buy a house. Her name on the deed. Only hers. The day she moved in, both children came. Tobiner had been keeping a painting in the back of his car for 3 years, a woman walking alone down a red earth road toward a pale morning sky. He had been waiting for the right wall. He found it in under a minute. Adiz cooked too much food, the way her mother always had, the way women who have known hunger cook when there is finally enough, as if abundance itself needs to be witnessed. They ate at the new table as the evening light moved across the walls. Nobody mentioned Emeka. Nobody mentioned the locks, or the garbage bags, or the room above Auntie Sylvia's house, or the door that would not open. They didn't need to. Those things were present in the room without being named. They always would be, not as wounds anymore, as foundation, as the ground underneath everything that had been built on top. After the dishes were done and her children had driven home, Grace sat alone in the quiet of her living room. The specific quiet that belongs to a space that is entirely yours, no name above yours on any document, no arrangement another person can decide to revoke. She thought about Daniel, about who he had been before loss and greed and fear had made the people around him into smaller, tighter versions of themselves, about the man who had taught Tobina to tie his shoes and called Adiz his little lawyer years before she could spell the word. She hoped, wherever he was, that he had seen what his children became. She turned off the lamp. She sat in the dark for a while, not sad, not triumphant, just here. In a house that was hers, in a life she had constructed from 2 garbage bags, a room with 1 window, and a refusal, quiet and total and unbreakable, to become what that morning had been designed to make her. Outside, the street carried on, a car passing, a dog somewhere, music from a neighbor's window, low and warm. She had built this, every last piece of it. And no one would ever change those locks again. If you know a woman who was handed nothing and built everything, who kept going when the people who should have stood beside her turned away, share this story for her. She deserves to see herself in it.